Welcome, welcome, welcome. This is John Van Lunen, and you are listening to Treasures of the Outer Banks, the podcast that celebrates the people and places that make this beach special. This is episode 046 with local historian Barbara Pardue. Barbara Pardue runs a Facebook page called Northern Outer Banks History. Her bloodlines run deep on the Northern Outer Banks, and her passion for the history is unmatched. She was first bitten by the history bug by a grandfather who shared numerous stories which led to her own personal research. She started the Facebook page to share this knowledge and research with her family. In this interview, Barbara shares stories of murder, gold bars, brothels, a revolutionary hero, Blackbeard, the Ash Wednesday storm, and more. If it sounds like we're in a restaurant, we are. We recorded this sitting in the First Light restaurant, which is located in Timbuktu Shopping Center, Kerala. This was my first time there, and they serve a great breakfast. They also serve lunch and dinner, and they have a small bar if you just want to hang out and have a good time. It's a cool little place and probably a lot busier in the summertime. I greatly appreciate them letting us sit there for this recording. You can hear the whole interview right here, right now. Facebook page, Northern Outer Banks History. This is your page, right?
Yes.
Okay. And tell me a little bit about the page.
I started it a couple years ago when there was nothing on the Outer Banks for history, Northern Outer Banks. They were doing a page for Sandbridge and Back Bay and Knott's Island, but not for the Northern Outer Banks. That's when I started it.
Okay. So it's a personal project of yours?
Yes.
And so are you kind of like the local family historian?
Definitely family historian, yes.
Okay. And where do you get most of your sources from?
Well, a long time ago, it was through yarns and stories from the family, and then I started doing research in '74. My grandfather was down at Nag's Head by Jockey's Ridge, and I had just come from a family reunion up in Moyock, and he told me some stories that were so wild that my mother and father were standing behind a door listening to her father tell me all these stories. So after we left, my mother hadn't even heard these stories. We started doing research at the Currituck Library, and we found more information. Then in 84, 5, 6, 7, I started again. And I had an older first cousin named Leland Tillett from Wanchese, and he had massive amount of information. And he knew I was enthused about it. So
was this just from memory, or did you write it down?
No, he copied everything.
Okay.
He would take a week's vacation, go up to Raleigh, and copy stuff. And so I had already copied a lot of stuff from Raleigh at the archives, and it was like a merging. So he gave me his information in garbage bags.
Wow.
And my husband and I took 2 weeks at Kinko's in Greenville, North Carolina, to copy all this stuff, and then we bound it. And then we sort of organized it, and then we gave back the garbage bags. So that really started it. But several years ago, I got Ancestry, and I started doing that, and a lot of the ancestry is wrong, and if you keep going depth into it, you might get it right. But I got
you started nailing down your ancestry.
Yes, Ancestry, and I started nailing down all the other chains of family related to my family. So I did groups, just not the Balms and the Whites. I did Tillett's, Daniels, you name it, I did it, Beasley's. But I got a free subscription to newspapers.com through Ancestry.
Wow. And
when I did that, I was looking up a murder mystery, which nobody in the family knew about. We knew my great-grandfather had been murdered. And I started looking up the newspapers with Elizabeth City and the surrounding newspapers, and it was like, voila, I found the murder case. So it was like I called several cousins up. They had never known about it. And I started copying all these newspaper articles, and I had this subscription for 1 week. I copied every article I could copy. I copied about the Whalehead Club, anything in Kerala, any kind of histories on everybody that lived in the Northern Outer Banks. And after that, I got that 1 free week, and then I subscribed to it, and I started doing more ancestry. Well, I started looking at a website, Facebook's Lago Mare, Back Bay.
Okay.
And the administrator is Brian, and he started having some little stories about the Outer Banks, his mysteries or info, and I started sending him some newspaper clippings. Then I decided, well, I could do a little Facebook page just for the northern Outer Banks. And so I started it, and that's it.
And how often do you post?
Sometimes I get in a roll, it'll be once or twice a month. And sometimes I do a lot of research in between, so it takes me a while. And I forward some of the good articles that Brian writes onto share it to my Facebook page. But it's usually about the northern Outer Banks.
Right. And you went to college at East Carolina. Were you a history major or anything?
No, I was an education major, and I cannot write. So I still can't write. And Brian writes such good articles, so I send some information to him, and he can write it up much better.
Yeah.
And then I'll share it on my site.
And so what are your favorite stories?
Oh, I have one favorite of all. And it was one that I discovered on newspapers.com, and then I really went into it. But it was like 2 or 3 murders on the northern Outer Banks, and this was the number one. This was the first one, and it was my great-grandmother who murdered her husband. You want to hear more?
Oh, please.
Okay. Well, they were very wealthy. It was Leon White, and he was one of the wealthiest cattlemen on the banks. He had the most cattle that roamed and grazed, and his hunt club was the Currituck Inlet Hunt Club, which he opened in 1894.
Wow.
And called it the L.R. White Summer Hotel. So his first pre-visitor was President Grover Cleveland in 1894.
Wow.
And then it was publicized in 1895 for the grand opening. It was $2 a night. So on the Outer Banks, there was 3 hotels: the Nag's Head, which was at $2 a night, and then up at Pine Island, which was the Baum Estate. His cousin had one there, which you don't hear much about, but it was a $2 a night hotel. And then it was Leon's hotel at $2 a night. So a lot of the cattlemen would come up, take their cattle all the way from Hatteras up, and then stop there, spend the night, and also could ship them off or keep on going up the beach and go to Norfolk and sell them. So it was the stopover point. And then during the winter, it was the duck hunting club. So Grover Cleveland came in 1894 and shot for a while, and then he went down to Hatteras and went fishing and shot down there. So he was well known. He was a political man too, and he acquired a lot of land. He originally owned 640 acres, and then it was down to about 485, and well known for duck hunting, big time. And he was into politics also. In 1913, they had an argument. His wife was named Maggie, and he and her were going to go to the courthouse, and she wanted some property to be settled, and he argued, I guess, with her, and they said they would take the boat over to the Currituck Courthouse.
Which was pretty much directly across.
Directly across from the Currituck Inlet. And so he told her, he said, I forgot something. And he was going to go back to the clubhouse. Instead, he went on another dock on another boat and went over and left her at the dock.
Ooh.
Left her overnight. So she went back to bed. I guess she was very upset. And the next morning, some people came by to see Leon. Well, she said, I don't know, I guess he's in bed. Well, they went to his bed, found out he was shot in the head twice. And he wasn't dead yet.
Oh.
He still lived.
Holy smokes.
For 2 days. But then they went and called the magistrate because something was fishy here.
Yeah.
And Maggie said, he must have committed suicide, shot himself in the head. Well, of course, you're not going to shoot yourself twice.
Right.
And the second thing, there was no gun in the bed.
Right.
So it was suspicious. So
Yeah.
they went and had a sort of a trial. They put her up on the mainland and had an inquiry. And then she said, I think I heard somebody in the house, and they went out the back of the house. It must have been somebody else. So that's just another lie. So she got not put in jail because she couldn't stay in jail in Currituck. So the local sheriff put her in his house with his kids. So she stayed there, and then she had 8 kids left at home. She had 15 total.
No way.
8 kids were left at home, and somebody was taking care of them, but they didn't know what happened.
Right.
This was kept a secret from all the children.
No way.
And so one of the grown daughters had come down from Scotland Neck and was at her father's side. Nobody knew this story. It was kept a secret.
Right.
So this happened September the 5th. He died September 6th. Could have happened September 4th.
Okay.
And the trial didn't happen until March. 6 months later, when the circuit judge came around. Well, this was in 13 major newspapers.
Wow.
It was headlines in one newspaper right next to George Vanderbilt dying.
Is that right?
It was on the column next to George. And it was really unbelievable. And they found her not guilty.
And you said they found the weapon, though?
Well, they found her not guilty because of lack of evidence.
Right.
But several years later.
Oh, several years later.
Yeah. Months, years. But it was later.
Yeah.
They found the gun in the flower garden in front of the hunt club.
Wow. They were walking by the whole time.
No, it's like they must have dug up and planted some new flowers and found this gun.
Right.
It all kept secret. I mean, that was never publicized either.
Right.
That was from a relative that I found that was related to some distant second cousin. It was unbelievable.
So was she still alive when they found the gun?
Oh, yeah. She didn't die until 38. Of course, he's dead. She's alive. She's running the hunt club with her 2 youngest sons. And later on, she had to give it up. And she moved to Portsmouth and was living with her older sister. And nobody ever knew
Crazy.
she was guilty. I called her Lizzie Borden.
Yeah.
Because she got off. So I call her our Lizzie Borden. But that is a great story because
That is amazing.
to get away with murder, she did.
Let's see. You also talk about what about your grandfather who found a gold bar?
Oh, that was unbelievable. It was during the time that Roosevelt wouldn't let you own gold.
Really?
Yes, and right offhand, I don't know the exact year, but you cannot own gold. And my grandfather completely hated Roosevelt. He found a gold bar, and he went down to the post office.
Wait, there's no more story. He tripped over a gold bar.
No. He found it in the Currituck Inlet.
Crazy.
He found it. And when he got so mad down at the post office when they said it was illegal to own it, he wasn't exactly sober at the time. He went and dumped it in the deepest part of the inlet.
Oh, geez.
So it happened that Roosevelt was coming in 1937 for the opening of the Lost Colony. And my grandfather was from Nags Head Woods, and my mother, May Beasley, was in the woods, and they told her to go trail Grandpa, who was named Yusef Beasley, because he was going down to see Roosevelt drive by, and they thought he might do something bad to Roosevelt.
Right.
So my mother was going through the woods, and she hid behind a tree. Well, she hid behind the tree. Grandpa knew she was there, so he later hid behind a tree. And then when my mother was looking for him, he scared her to death. So they walked down and went down to the main road to wave at Roosevelt, and she was hoping he would just wave. Instead, he sort of cussed him out and yelled and everything. But she had to be keeping an eye on him so he wouldn't do anything crazy.
Right.
So he hated Roosevelt after that section with the gold bar.
Right. You have a story about, is it Bessie Dowdy?
Betsy Dowdy.
Betsy Dowdy.
Well, they're at the end of the inlet, Currituck Inlet, which is about 5-6 miles down from the original old Currituck Inlet at the Virginia line, which they call Corova. It was a new inlet, and it opened up in 1718. And it was opened up 1713 because 1718 Blackbeard died and he had gone through the inlet. But in Revolutionary War time, they had an island out there. It was 112 acres. They didn't have a name for the island, but it had like a pub on it. And all the schooners that would come through the inlet, which was about 9 feet deep at the time, would stop at the pub. And they would have their liquor and everything. And every time these old pubs during the Revolutionary War, they had a brothel.
All right.
And so one of the clerks of court way back when said in his book, said in his statement one time that all the illegal children of Currituck County, all not illegal but illicit, illegitimate, yeah, that's right, that's the correct word, came from that island. But, so what happened was they would go there and stop and have their liquor and everything, and their women, and then they would head over to the Currituck Courthouse, was directly across from the Currituck Inlet. Well, later on, Betsy Dowdy, who was raised on the banks, she heard that the English were coming. They were in Norfolk, and they were slaughtering all the horses and everything. She didn't want her banker horse, Black Bess, to get killed or anything like that. So she rode that horse across the way to say to General Skinner that the British were coming. It was an old story, but they named that island Betsy's Marsh.
That's awesome.
So,
how come you think she doesn't get the same notoriety that Paul Revere gets?
She should.
Yeah.
She did it before he did. And she traveled a lot further. And another thing is, she did it by herself.
Right.
Well, Paul Revere had several other people. And now they have put a plaque up over on the Currituck side for Betsy.
Right. That's is that a coin jock kind of?
It's a red marker. It's in front of like a Dollar General. It's off the road some. It's got briars and everything because I tried getting a close-up picture of it.
Yeah, it's not far from Currituck High School.
It should be in a welcome center, not there, because you can't stop.
True. And
read the sign because you're going 55 miles an hour.
Right.
So it should be in a better location than that. But anyway, they did commemorate her, but she's not a yarn. She is true.
That's great.
And I did some research on that. And in the wills, she inherited a calf, a cow from her father. So that's unique. But she was raised on the banks right near the Currituck Inlet.
Wow, that's awesome.
A lot of history in that Currituck Inlet.
Yeah, so just to give the listener a little feel for what that was like, it was an enormous body of water, so big that full-on sailboats could sail through, full sail right through the inlet and go straight to the courthouse in Currituck.
They could somehow get to the courthouse. If they couldn't get past Betsy's Marsh, they had smaller little boats to go. But it was 1.2 miles wide. So they had a south channel, which was deeper, and that's where our family's estate bounders on the Currituck Inlet Hunt Club, also the L.R. White Hotel, and 1.2 miles north of that, going toward North Swan Beach, was the North Channel. So it was the North Channel, South Channel, which was deeper, just like Oregon Inlet. Right. It's almost like Oregon Inlet, but not as wide.
Right. So you had another story about Blackbeard. Tell me about your Blackbeard story.
Blackbeard, I love this story. Barbara Snowden wrote it up one time. She's the historian for Currituck County. And it was Blackbeard going through the inlet in 1718, 2 weeks before he was killed down at Ocracoke Beaufort Inlet. And there was a William Bell. He owned Bell's Island. And he had some gold, he had a silver chalice, he had food and whatever products he had. But the Port Authority, Tobias Knight, knew he had this stuff. And there's a place right off the east side of Knott's Island called Knight's Point. And that was where the old Currituck Inlet was. And that Currituck Inlet closed at the same time the new Currituck Inlet opened. Well, the story goes, Blackbeard came in, took his little projet and his little boat, and he had like one sail on it, and he went straight over to Bell's Island and robbed Mr. Bell. And that merchandise that he stole from Mr. Bell was later found in the ship when Blackbeard was killed. So Mr. Bell went up to Williamsburg, and he was one of the witnesses, and he wanted to get his silver goblet back.
Yeah, so there's the connection right
and there's the connection. The bad connection is there was a William Bell down in Bath, too, that had Bell Island, and there's a William Bell in Currituck that had Bell's Island. Both were government workers. And it was called Currituck Precinct. Not Currituck County, it was Albemarle County, but the Currituck Precinct.
Right.
But there's two different stories. I'm on the edge of believing the Currituck County one because of the Tobias Night and Knight's Point.
Right.
Because that seems to be more true.
Right.
Even if they did have a little record of Currituck Precinct from one of the pirates that was on trial in Williamsburg.
They had a mention of that?
Yes, they did mention that in the court records. But how do you believe a pirate all the time?
Yeah, who's about to be hanged, right?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. A lot of this information that I've found is through research, and it's also through East Carolina University Archives. I have done a lot of work at the Raleigh Archives, and a lot of their older information has been put in vaults and you cannot handle anymore. And it's on microfilm, and the microfilm is you can't read it.
Yeah.
But this information, I used to go to the courthouse at Currituck and read it.
Is that right?
And I copied it. So I would go back to the archives in Raleigh and retry to get a couple pages I missed, and I can't get it. They've got it in a vault that they will not take out anymore.
Wow.
So it's impossible to get some of these pages.
We're just out of curiosity, where are you keeping all this information? Do you just have reams and reams of notebooks and stuff?
Notebooks, and then I made 11 by 8 folders, and I had them bound at places, and I would copy it and bound it and then put contents on the outside of it, and I have got loads of that stuff.
Yeah.
But other than the 25-cent little leaflets you get, at Staples or whatever, and write the notes every time I do it, I've got loads of them, but I've also got bound ones that I've kept records for. They'll go someplace, somewhere, when time comes, when I die. But I keep on finding more information now, and I have to write it up. I have people that call me all the time.
Yeah, that's cool.
And they want to find out something.
Okay.
And so recently, last year, a lady from Knott's Island called me up and asked me about the Indians. And when did they finally leave?
Oh, right.
And that was an interesting story because I didn't know much about the Indians.
Right.
And she really wanted to know when they left Knott's Island, but also Currituck. And then there was the Trail of Tears, of course, but it was really had to do with when the census came out. And in the census, the Indians had to sign and had to check a box. They either had to sign for colored or white.
Right.
So they had to choose one or the other. And you lost all the census then for Indians.
Yeah, right.
They had to sign either or.
Yeah.
So you don't have much information on that subject.
Right. Ash Wednesday storm, you've done a little research on that?
Oh, well, that was just fact. But we were here right after the Ash Wednesday storm. And
you personally?
Personally, when I was a little kid. But my grandfather was related to both the ladies who died on the Ash Wednesday storm. And
what were their names? Do you know?
Oh, well, Eva O'Neill, which her son was Griggs O'Neill, the deputy sheriff in Corolla. And that's the O'Neill side on his mother's side. And the other one was Ladybug Bowden. And Ladybug was his oldest sister. And that was her nickname, Margaret. Her name was Margaret Beasley Bowden. And they both died right there at the Currituck Inlet. You saw it today, near the Coast Guard station, and like drowning, a heart attack. one was trying
They
to
were
save...
in the house, right? I mean,
they were in the house.
Flooded in the house.
Yeah, but one went out to save her horses that were in the pen.
Right.
And he died of exhaustion and exposure and everything like that. One was like in her early 60s and one was early 80s.
Right.
And so they died. In the Ash Wednesday storm book that was printed, they said nobody died in Dare County. But in Currituck County, 2 died.
Right. Right. What did you think of the devastation when you came out here and saw it?
Well, when it was out, it was a lot of puddles. It was all clear water. Sand dune was gone. And I went through the house, and so did I think a couple other little 8, 9-year-olds down the beach, the Potton kids. And I didn't know they had done it, but I'd seen pictures later. But I did. I went through them, and they had like sand dunes around them and stuff. And I went through the drawers. I didn't take anything out of these houses. I just looked inside the houses. And like drawers with their clothes in it and everything. It was upsetting. But at that time, I went to my grandfather and grandmother took me to a graveyard that had been covered over with sand for decades. And now the Ash Wednesday storm had washed it away, and everything was beautiful white.
How crazy is that?
Graves. And this was the old Currituck Inlet Methodist Church's graveyard. And so that name of that church changed every time the Coast Guard changed the name. It was the Currituck Inlet Life Saving Station.
Right.
And then the church was called the Currituck Inlet Methodist Church.
Right.
Then they changed it to Coast Guard. And so the name of the church was changed to Penny's Hill Coast Guard Station.
Right.
Well, the cemetery changed its name twice too, but the cemetery became uncovered. And my grandmother was sitting there telling me each grave and how one lady died childbirth and one lady had 2 twins there.
Wow.
And all. Then Caleb Barco, he was the postmaster of Barco. And he had been raised on the beach, the northern banks, and he had died, and that's where he was buried. But all these graves were right there, and I got to see them. So in 1987, I asked my older cousin, Lil and Tillett, I said, I want to go back there and see those graves again. Well, we started looking, and we could only find about 6 inches of Caleb Barco's grave. Well, again, about several years ago, I went back to the graveyard, and I couldn't find any of the graves.
Just covered with sand.
Covered with sand.
Right.
It's wildlife property. I have no idea. And I've had people go back there and look. We've tried with metal detectors and everything, couldn't do it, even though it's wildlife land. It's too bad that they didn't want my metal detector, but we're looking for a graveyard.
Yeah, understood.
So there's 2 graveyards. There's one on our property, and that's the Smith graveyard and Cal graveyard. And then there's this graveyard, which the church had. So there's 2 graveyards.
Right. And I've heard that, some of these communities just sprouted up around the Coast Guard life-saving stations, or the, whatever you want the U.S. life-saving station circuit.
Or U.S. life-saving stations and Coast Guard stations.
Yes, right.
Yeah.
And so there's probably a couple more. I'm thinking there's got to be a couple more cemeteries. No?
No. What happened?
They might have been deserted. No.
No. What they did was they buried them by the telephone poles.
Is that right?
Like when they had shipwrecks, they either took a area and put one group of shipwrecks in certain areas, and then they thought, oh, I think we did it there. Oh, I think we did it down at the Methodist Church. Oh, I don't know, because you can't find it anymore, so you don't know.
Right.
Then I was told by Barbara one time that there was an anchor, and they buried everybody by this anchor. If I ever find this anchor, it might be a graveyard.
Right.
Then they had a shipwreck of the day when they were finishing up the lighthouse in Kerala, and everybody was killed. And those graves, they buried them at every pole, telegraph pole.
Crazy. Right.
And there's no graves.
Right.
They just buried them at the telegraph poles.
What about Penny's Hill? I've seen a lot about Penny's Hill, but I've never got to experience it.
Yeah.
So.
Well, today you got to see a picture.
I saw a picture of Penny's Hill.
And everybody talks about Penny's Hills. It was the greatest place to drive your car up in your roadster in the 60s, early 70s. But some of these locals have, said, oh, no, this is Penny's Hill. But I've proven through pictures. I've got a picture in 1939 that Penny's Hill was located north of the Currituck Inlet, right on the edge.
All right.
And in 39, it was sitting right there in the middle of the Currituck Inlet. And then it shifted southward. But the two hills that were south was Newark's Hill, and the bigger one was Dutton's Hill. And so what Penny's Hill it took to go down, it shifted. Newark's Hill was shifting in the 1930s, and it covered up the postal office, which was called Seagull. It was definitely closed 32 to 36. Newark's Hill going into Dutton's Hill, and then finally you got Penny's Hill. So it was three hills that combined into one.
Okay.
But the original two that were there were Newark and Dutton.
Why does Newark ring a bell with me? Was there somebody historical around here?
Well, the biggest story in the United States was the biggest child in the world was...
Maybe that's what I said.
That's it. The big boy of Currituck County.
That's right. I think I saw that post recently.
Newark. And he died at a young age and everything, and he was well known, and everybody liked him also.
Yeah,
but that was the Newarks right there.
Okay.
Right there at Penny's Hill. It was their hill. It was called Newark's Hill.
Wow.
It hadn't even been called Penny's Hill.
Oh,
it
so
was still Newark's Hill
new. Okay.
when he was living.
Right. And I've heard that from other places on the Outer Banks, is that it used to be called this, now it's called that, so...
Well, I think I've got it straight if they've read my Facebook page, because I even had maps showing back when it was called Penny's Hill. And I also have the map that says Newark's Hill, and I have the map that says Dutton's Hill. So it's called proof is in the pudding when I've got these old maps.
Right.
But it's a good story about the Newarks. But they left in the 40s.
The whole family.
Truthfully, a lot of people started leaving. And
yeah, that was Nags Head Woods. A lot of people around World War II, people just started looking for work somewhere else.
Yeah, it was hard. Duck hunting had gotten restricted. And 1936, you had a big storm. You had, I think, 2 hurricanes in 1 year.
Yeah.
And it got washed over. It changed the salinity, and everything changed. Mother Nature changed. 36 was the big year because even it washed over from the old Currituck Inlet and wiped out all the gardens, the pine trees.
Oh, really?
The farming, everything was destroyed. So 36 to 40, it was almost like they were leaving. A lot of them left to Norfolk, Princess Anne County.
Yeah, it was a hard life down here.
Yeah, because
it was not easy.
In the 40s, when they started having bodies washing up on shore from all the graveyard of the Atlantic.
Shipwrecks and
it was like
ships being shot down.
There was a lot of dead bodies on the beach.
Right.
So they left.
Yeah.
We still own our property. We come down, but my mother was born there, 1924. My grandmother was born there in 1899.
Wow.
My great-great-grandmother was born there in 1827. So it goes back a ways.
That's amazing, isn't it?
Somebody said, well, you must not have lived here very long. I said, no, I haven't lived here very long. You must not have been around here very long because you don't know the milepost numbers. I said, no, I don't really know the milepost numbers. I know the sand dunes, I know all that. Well, you must not. I said, no, I haven't been here very long. Maybe family's been here about 300 years, but no, we haven't been here very long.
Any other good stories you want to share?
Well, since we're doing this podcast and it's February, this is a good time to say about one historically correct event that happened. And it happened again with my family. The story goes back to Judge Wedby. Judge Charles Wedby wrote the Mysteries, Outer Banks Mysteries, and I loved his books. I collected every one of them. I started doing my research in 74, so he wrote this book in 1978. And it was the story about Currituck Jack. And Currituck Jack, Judge had fantasized it. He always makes a yarn out of everything. But I corrected him at his book signing. I said, you said Samuel Jasper, who was my 4th great grandfather. And I said, and then you come up after Samuel Jasper, you repeated a name again, and you called him Samuel Jarvis. I said, that's a mistake. His name is Samuel Jasper. You call him Jarvis. And then he said they were brother-in-laws when actually they were half-brothers. So I just wanted to say this to you, so in case you do a second printing of this, you get it right.
Okay.
So,
is this author still alive?
Oh no, Judge Wedby was an old guy. He was a judge in Greenville, North Carolina.
Okay.
But he was from Hertford, but he had one of the old houses down at Nag's Head. He was a character. He wrote about Blackbeard, and the skull of Blackbeard is supposed to have been a drinking cup, back when he was in a fraternity, and all these old yarns. He's told many an old yarn. But later on, Paramore wrote it in Chapel Hill. He wrote the story up right. Everything was correct. But the story goes like this. Currituck Jack was a black slave. He's supposed to have been about 7 foot tall. And he was owned by Henry White of Knott's Island. And Knott's Island, Henry's relative was Caleb White. And Caleb White was half brothers, step brothers to Samuel Jasper. And those three were taking their merchant ship, Polly, out of Charleston, and ended up, the British captured them. And they tried to convince Jack, the slave, who was owned by Caleb, originally was owned by Henry, to defect and go to the British side. Well, Jack didn't. And he stayed, and he got unchained by the British, and he ended up telling the Caleb and Samuel about what the British were doing, and they were going to make up a story about capturing the British. So they all broke their chains, and those three captured the 5 British that had taken over the schooner Polly. Well, they managed to make it to where they were going, and the Continental Congress had said that Jack, the slave, should have been given his freedom. So Jack had to stay up in the area in a hospital because he was severely injured from the frost and the snow and the boat because he was up on the top deck. Well, he later came back to Knott's Island, and Henry White wouldn't let his freedom for Jack, wouldn't let go of him. He was then willed to Caleb White, and again the same thing goes. And so Caleb left everything to his half-brother Samuel Jasper, and they worked it out, and Jack was freed. So Jack went and took the name of John Jasper White. He took his owner's names, his official name, and he was set free, and he paid for another slave to be his wife, and he became a shipping captain out of Knott's Island and lived on the west-hand side of Knott's Island, he had his own land, connected to Samuel Jasper's homestead. Well, Jack became a shipping captain, and everybody on Knott's Island approved of him. But it's in the Library of Congress, the story about Currituck Jack.
Right.
It's a unique story.
Yeah, and now I believe they're building a statue of him in
I hope
County?
so. It made it to the semifinalist. Barbara Snowden wrote it all up. It made it to the semifinalist, but it could take several years. But one of these days it will make it to the finalists and then become a monument. Hopefully they'll put it on the Currituck side. I could see that. At the Welcome Center or someplace that it could be recognized.
I think that's what they're talking about.
Not like Betsy Dowdy out in a field. I mean, you should at least see it.
Right.
But it is a true story. And it's in the Library of Congress.
Yeah.
So that's a great story.
That is awesome. Thanks for sharing that.
Okay.
Any other any projects you got coming up? Anything you're working on at the moment?
I am working on a couple things. I'm still trying to figure things out. I have to do it on my sly, and it's when I do. It takes me a while to figure things out. People ask me questions, and I'll look stuff up. But I am working on about 3 projects.
Any desire to put anything like a book together?
Oh goodness, no! I cannot write. I was terrible. No. Let other people write these stories.
All right.
I just want the stories to be passed down. I want history is correct. I don't want anybody changing the history. I don't want history always changes. I've learned. I made mistakes. I didn't know the story about the O'Neills on the Outer Banks. I thought my family, my grandmother from Nags Head Woods was an O'Neill. I thought they were one of the first families of the Outer Banks. looking for the ship for the lost colony and found out they weren't. The Scarboroughs and the O'Neills were not members of the ship. And so that's one of the stories I found through research.
Nice.
But I'm still looking up stuff.
All right.
It won't stop. I definitely can't write a book.
No?
Nah. But okay, the one thing I'm into, and I do help, Roger Payne wrote Place Names on the Outer Banks. I tell people to buy that book if they're into history and want to learn correct place names.
Yeah, I did buy that book, by the way.
You did?
Yeah.
And that was his first book in '85. Then he wrote another book a couple years ago. And his first book, he had a couple islands that were incorrect. And I wrote him. And I said, these islands are incorrect, the position of where they're at. He said, why? I said, how do you know that? And I said, because we own those islands. And so he was so nice, he sent me another book.
Okay.
And I got the book, and so hopefully he'll write a third edition. But I've contacted him on a couple locations about place names, and you really got to know the place names and have history correct. And so that's one of the things I look into a lot is place names.
And for the listener, this gentleman wrote a book, and it's all about the history of the names of North Carolina, and how some were preceded and succeeded. Some names were just changed, outright changed. Some were forgotten.
Oh, some islands were sunk. They don't exist anymore. There's creeks, names, rivers, but it's the Outer Banks. And it's good to know. It's the biggest one I'll work on too until I die is Corova. Corova is the last 2.3 miles by the Virginia line.
And that was that was a development, right?
Yes, Corova Beach it was called.
Which, by the way, I just learned out a year ago that it's a combination of Carolina and Virginia. Shows you how slow I am.
No, but there's a lot of people up at Corova who write it and they call it Corova as a combination of Corolla and Virginia. And so those little things, that's one of the major things why I did the Facebook page. The Facebook page was first to tell my distant relatives their history, which they didn't know. The second was for place names, and place names for the locals who are buying in to the Northern Outer Banks, so they'll know that this is the Northern Outer Banks, and not the whole Currituck County is called Corova. People down at Pine Island, I don't think they want to be called Corova, but they do call the four-wheel drive area Corova, which is not. It's like Seagull, Swan Beach, the Maggie White Estate, then the Federal Wildlife Land, the North Swan Beach, and then the last 2.3 miles is Corova.
Do people still call Seagull Seagull?
Not really.
All right.
Seagull lost his post office in the 30s.
That's
the
what I thought,
funny story about that was the Seagull post office was owned by Guggenheim.
The museum.
His relatives. Robert Guggenheim owned that land.
Really?
And he had the O'Neills as superintendents.
Okay.
O'Neill again.
Okay.
That famous name.
Right.
And they started a post office in 1909. It was closed up because of the sanding up of the house,
Right.
which he left, and ended up the O'Neills got the land. But Guggenheim had his own hunt club.
Wow. Isn't that crazy?
And that is the Guggenheims that died on the Titanic, the Guggenheims that were
Really?
the museum in New York. Guggenheims. It's the same Guggenheims.
Wow.
Just like the Currituck Club had Willie Vanderbilt and J.P. Morgan.
Right.
That's big names.
Yeah.
But they didn't have their wives, remember. They like, as Travis Morris wrote in his books, they like the creeks and all the quirkiness about the old hunt clubs. They didn't want it to be real modernized. And then the Swan Island Club were the Bostonians.
Yeah.
That was like Endicott Shoes. He was a member.
Okay.
And that's a big name in the shoe company.
That's just amazing. It was just these beaches were just overrun by Northerners just trying to get away, right?
Yes.
Trying to find.
And they left it as it was.
They didn't try to make huge improvements.
No. It was.
I was just reading about the J.P. Knapp guy. It's like he was quite a revolutionary. I mean,
He was great.
He employed a bunch of people. He was all about preservation, and I don't know, sounded like he was a responsible steward of Currituck County.
Exactly. He also started Ducks
Unlimited.
Yeah, but before that it was called More Game Birds of America. But he started it. Everything. And there's people that lived on Knott's Island, like Jane Brumley. Everybody got a little duck decoy.
Is that right?
That lived on Knott's Island. He gifted them that.
Wow.
He was a great man. He also helped the Currituck school system out tremendously.
Right.
So
they even have a little high school named after him over there, the early college, J.P. Neff Early College over there.
But good man. But the other ones were okay too. It was funny that they had advertisements back when the Knights built their Whalehead Club, Corolla Island. Excuse me, it was called Corolla Island.
Is that what it was called?
It was not called the Whalehead Club.
Who changed it to Whalehead Club?
Well, Mr. Adams did.
Okay.
So really and truly, the Knights who built it, it shouldn't be called the Whalehead Club. It should be called Corolla Island, because they're the ones who built it.
Oh, right.
And she had a hot and cold running water. Hot and cold. Salt water too. Her bath had all these faucets.
Wow.
It was also salt water.
So just for the record to the listener, Barbara was a volunteer at the Hunt Club.
A long time ago, back when it was only volunteers.
Right.
And we had full access to the place.
Right.
I go to the basement with attic, every place.
I moved here in '97, and I think I did a walkthrough when they were really just kind of starting the whole renovation. So it was looking pretty crude back then, but
there was still the hole in the floor.
Yeah.
In the living room that went down. You could look downstairs.
They have a dumbwaiter in there, don't they?
Oh yeah, then they took it out.
Did they? Okay.
They had a dumbwaiter. I took a good picture of it.
Is that right?
Yes.
Maybe I must have seen it or something.
No, it was there.
Okay.
You really went before they really redid it.
Yeah.
It was fantastic.
They have servant quarters up in the attic?
Oh yeah, the servant quarters, the main servants had the bigger rooms, yes.
Crazy.
It's a lot of stories. I lost all that information. That was decades ago.
Right.
Yeah, but that was cool. I mean, that was the main thing to come to Currituck, was to see the Whalehead Club. Back when I was a little girl, we couldn't go past the gate. My grandfather would not let us. But that was when it was the Navy research.
Right.
For
they housed the Navy guys there or
yeah,
something.
and they also had the rocket fuel testing. It was solid rocket fuel testing. So my grandfather was really, like a lot of locals, went in and out of that place when nobody was there, and we weren't permitted.
Right.
It was against them. But the funny thing about the solid rocket fuels, they buried those barrels.
Oh boy.
Yeah, over there on the ocean side where they're building all the new homes.
That's going to rear its ugly head one of these days.
It did. I did research on that too. And the government had made the paperwork and said that all the barrels had been delivered out of the sand.
Yeah.
Oh no, they're building these mega mansions out there, and they found like 3 or 4 more.
Oh,
they had never dug up all of them. I think that's hilarious. It's like building on a graveyard.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden you hit a pile and you hit a solid rocket fuel from the old Whalehead Club. I think that's
surprise.
Funny. Yeah.
Yeah,
I did an article on that one time, and I even had the paperwork.
Really?
And I even had the picture of the barrels that were found in the sand. It's like, okay.
Man, it's like this. They found munitions and bombs in southern shores in people's backyards.
Really?
Huge bombs, yeah. Just a couple years ago.
Wow. I didn't know that. See, no, my granddaddy would take me to, we would go and pick up brass shells after they would fire.
Yeah.
They had the targets and everything, and we would go down in the pickup truck, on the back of the pickup truck, and we had crab bushels, and we would go down, only pick up the brass shells. There was certain types of airplanes that only hit brass.
Okay.
And we would pick up the brass shells, and we would also pick up soft shell crabs and stuff like that. Well, I met Eddie Potton's father one day on the beach, and he was mentioning something about he made more money picking up shells one year than he did fishing. I said, who did you go with when you went shell hunting? And this is, brass shells.
Yeah.
And he says, some old man, he was a crazy old man, Beasley. I go, oh my God, Yusef Beasley. He said, yeah. I said, that's my granddaddy. He said he went out there and they were in a sand dune. And they used to have a flag on the beach, so red and green. They were shooting or not shooting.
Right.
And he goes, he hid in the sand dune on the opposite side of them shooting. He said, but we made more money that year off brass shells than we did fishing.
Yeah.
But
Episode 2 or 3 with Waikiki Wise, he had family lived up in Kerala, family lived in Nags Head. He was always driving back and forth. And right about the county line, his aunt was driving the old station wagon down the pole road, and bombs are coming down left and right. There was a miscommunication, and so they didn't see the flags or the system. But yeah, he thought it was hilarious. He was about 10 years old, and just bombs are going off left and right. Somehow they survived. But.
Is your friend Wise, W-I-S-E?
W-I, yeah.
Well, guess what? The Wises are from Nags Head Woods.
Yep, that's probably the same people.
And guess what? My grandfather's sister was named Mary Beasley Wise.
Is that right?
She lived in the house on the top of the cliff right next to Polly Cemetery.
Is that right?
The Wises and the Beasleys were intermarried.
That might be them.
That was, Mary Wise was real well known. She had a place down by the old, on the beach.
Yeah.
And my grandfather was visiting Mary Wise when Roosevelt was driving by in 1937 to go see the Lost Colony. That's where my mother and my grandfather were at Mary Wise's house.
Nice.
Isn't that funny?
So Waikiki, they lived in Nags Head Woods, and his grandmom would, I guess, hike over the dunes and go to the ocean front and grab all the dirty laundry for the people living on the ocean, take it back to her house, throw it in the laundry machine. The laundry machine was a two-stroke, ran on a two-stroke engine. So you had to kickstart it like a motorcycle.
Oh my goodness.
And they do the laundry, and she'd dry it, fold it up, and hike it back over to the ocean side.
Well, Mary O'Neill Beasley, and then her daughter was Mary Beasley Wise.
Right.
That is.
Well, speaking of Beasley, and I don't know if there's a relationship here, but just about a month ago, I did an interview with a Rami Beasley, and he's a local fisherman, grew up here. He's about, 75 years old now, still fishing, served in Vietnam. He wrote a little book about serving in Vietnam, but yeah, it's just...
Well, that Beasley's from Collington and all that area down there?
He's from Collington.
That is a relative.
Okay.
They're relatives because there's the Beasleys of Nags Head Woods, and there's the Beasleys of Knott's Island.
Okay.
And they're not related.
Okay.
And the Beasleys that were from Nags Head Woods came up to Penny's Hill. Okay, what they call Penny's Hill now, but to Dutton's and Lower's Hill. And they were the Beasleys there. So all the Beasleys around Penny's Hill came from Nags Head Woods.
Okay.
And they were also the caretakers at Monkey's Island, Solomon Beasley, and that group, Seth Beasley, Solly Beasley.
You know them all.
They're all...
I don't know how you keep track of all these
they're
names.
They're all related. I got
When
from
in
Knott's
doubt.
Island down to Hatteras. And the funny thing about Hatteras was my favorite historical informational cousin was Leland Tillett. And his wife was Miss Ola Stowe Tillett. I love those two. And they're from Wanchese. But Miss Ola came from Hatteras, right there where the ferry landing was.
On the north end?
Down there before you go to Ocracoke.
Okay, yeah.
Okay. And Miss Ola, her family got the cat from the old boat that was lost.
The ghost ship.
Yeah.
They got the ghost ship
They got the cat.
That's a piece of history right
Oh,
there.
that is big time history. And their family graveyard is right there at the ferry boat landing.
Is that right?
So from down there all the way up.
That's amazing.
That is a neat story.
Well, Barbara, your stories are awesome. Your knowledge of the history is amazing. I hope you keep telling the stories. I hope you keep posting them on Facebook. If anybody has any questions, should they direct them to you, or do you not want to answer any questions?
No, they can always PM me.
Message you on
Yeah,
Facebook?
Yes, and then ask a question, and I'll try to get them straight. But I have probably 30 or 40 families that I've done on Ancestry just to keep the links of all the families here on the Outer Banks.
I don't know how you keep them all straight, but
It's
good for
hard,
you.
especially on Knott's Island is the biggest one. They repeated their name so many times. I said to one person, it's like George Foreman. I have never seen so many Henry Whites in my life. And Manny and Wanchis, they do the same thing with the names.
Right.
Repeat.
Yeah.
It's hard to know which one is which.
Right.
And then
Can't keep track of them.
they name their sons, and the next son's the same name again. So it's hard.
That's a good one.
Thanks a lot for this podcast.
My pleasure. It was great meeting you today, Barbara.
Okay.
Before we sat down and recorded, Barbara was nice enough to give me a quick tour of the area where she lives in Swan Beach. She showed me where the Currituck Inlet used to be, where the L.R. White Summer Hotel once stood, and where she lives when she's in town. These places are located on private property, so I was privileged to see them in person. Funny side note, before Barbara and I started the recording, we were getting to know each other, and we found out we both used to live in the same area of Prince George's County in Maryland. As I was walking out of the restaurant, the manager said he heard me talking about Prince George's County, and he told me he was from Bowie, which is also in PG County. I should mention we were the only three in the restaurant when we showed up, and we were all from PG County. What are the chances? Anyway, big thanks to Barbara Pardue for sitting down with me. You can find her on Facebook at Northern Outer Banks History. And don't forget to be sure to check out my website, treasuresoftheouterbanks.com, and sign up for the weekly emails so we can stay in touch. I promise I won't be annoying. Also, while you're on the website, be sure to check out the merchandise page because I have some new t-shirt designs I think are pretty cool. Just click on an image and drill down to see the full catalog. I'll be back in 2 weeks with another episode, and until that time, make it a good one.